Welcome. We're glad to have you here. I'm not going to give you a long introduction this morning. I would like to tell you who will be speaking to you this morning, however. This morning you're going to hear about the Canadian Transcript Network, which is a work in process. It is a dream. And Bill McKee and Trudy Sykes are going to talk to you about that. Bill is the Director of Operations of the Ontario College Application System. He is the PESC board member, as well now as the vice chair of the PESC Canadian User Group. And Trudy Sykes is the Director of Operations of the Ontario University's Application Centre. Clark Ferguson, who is scheduled to co-present, is the CIO of University of Lethbridge. Clark will not be here this morning. He sends his regrets. His daughter is actually at convocation right now, right here at University of Ottawa. So he would like to be here with us, but cannot be. And I will turn it over to Trudy.
Good. Well, welcome. Good to see everybody here. And this is a very exciting strategic initiative that we're embarking on. And so we'd like to sort of let you know what's happening and hopefully spark some interest from you folks. So we have an agenda. Quickly we'll go through. So we're the Canadian National Transcript, what the dream is. We will present who the supporters are, how we got started, what the business case is, and just what some of the benefits are, PESC XML, and what some of the things that are actually happening and how you can get involved. So the dream. So how did it start and what are we kind of looking for? So within Ontario, we've had a transcript hub, electronic transcript exchange for a number of years, and it works very well, and we're very happy with it, and we'd like to expand it, and there are other areas in Canada that are starting to look at the same thing, Alberta and BC. And so we started looking at that and saying, okay, can we do that, and if we do it, how do we do it? So we're going to do it with something called PESC XML Standards, which I'll talk about in a minute. We're looking at both secondary and post-secondary transcript exchanges. So depending on where your area of interest is, either one of those will be beneficial to many of our institutions. We want to make sure we can do it faster. We want to do it with less work and cost. We want to have accuracy. We want to eliminate fraudulent documents. This is a big issue that's happening, and if we can ensure that the data is getting to the receiver in an accurate and efficient and secure way, that eliminates work within the institution and concerns that are happening. And it's a benefit for the entire sector, the students, the colleges, and the universities. So we just had a session with the PESC CEO, Michael Sessa, to explain what his organization was. So I know most of you were not here. And so I'm going to give a 2-minute capsule of his 50-minute presentation. PESC is an organization that started in the States. It's been around since about 2004. And it works to develop standards for the educational sector, focusing mostly on post-secondary education. The organization has 2 employees, an executive CEO and an assistant administrative assistant. However, there's a large community involved on a volunteer basis to do a number of components of the work. So the community is sort of divided into, as we put here, 4 areas. So information that they use in the States, PDF attachments, and student aids. So those standards have been developed by various work groups, are in effect, and are so those are groups, and they'll have anywhere from 10 to 100 members on their distribution list. There's vendors involved in those components as well. Michael was just saying here that there are 90 members organized in his PESC organization. And that deals all the way from vendors to institutions to government bodies that are involved. There are a number of task forces as well, too, that are looking at how do we move things forward, how do we change processes, how do we evolve. So one of them, which is very interesting, is the authentication task force, so the identity management. They're working on a whole process for that, working with various institutions and vendors to develop that. And then there's a common data services task force in terms of how can we ensure that the data that we need to transfer to another institution or another location, how is that working? How can we be sure that all of the standards on that protocol and that transmission are happening properly, and what do we need to be thinking about? And there are also a number of user groups that have been developed. Canadian user group, CEDS user group, which is looking at as well the data services task force, educational records user group. This one has been around for a long time, and this group has been involved and very active in actually creating the initial standards, which are now available. And there's a student aid user group. So how did we get started with the Canadian user group? It's been an evolution. There are 4 application centers within Canada. There are 2 in Ontario, so there's the College Application Center, which Bill is involved in, the University's Application Center. And then there's one in Alberta called Apply Alberta, and there's one in BC called BC Campus. And so the 4 centers are either quite new and have started looking at how do we develop and what should we be doing and what are best practices. And some of us have been around a little longer and are doing modernization work. And as we modernize, we're saying, what are the best practices out there? So independently, all 4 centers have come to the conclusion that we really need to have data exchange standards going forward. And PESC has been the organization that we've selected to use and to adopt those standards. So the 4 application centers became members of PESC and started meeting and saying, well, really we need to make sure we have a Canadian voice happening, and we need to make sure that more of Canada is aware of these standards, and as people are working on projects and things, we need to ensure that they're at least aware of these standards and are maybe potentially willing to adopt them. Everything here within PESC is on a voluntary basis, but of course the more standards we have, the more it benefits each one of us. So the 4 centers said, okay, let's create a user group, and that happened about 2 years ago. And our first focus within the user group was education, to look at how can we inform and let people know what we're about and how we're doing it. So we've done that through attending a number of conferences. Brian presented at Campaign last year. We were at the Rook conference last June here in Ottawa, and we've talked to a number of people about this whole process. And so work is starting. Bill will touch base on some of the things that are actually starting to happen to move this forward in a concrete way. There's no government body pushing us to do this. It's the organization and the universities themselves that are recognizing the benefit of this. And we have quite a bit of support. The next slide. So the next slide just indicates that we are forming partnerships with a number of different organizations, and one of the major ones is a ROOK. So although we are part of the PESC organization, we have a memorandum of understanding with a ROOK, and we have cross-membership between those 2 organizations. And a ROOK is very much in support of the work that we are doing, and we're working with them to ensure standards are existing, and we're working in combined some of our resources and so on for communications and those things. So very exciting. So we actually have on our user group, we have representation just about across the country. So we have various institutions. Here's a list of the memberships that we have. So we have institutions, universities and colleges. We have vendor groups, and vendor groups will be things like Illusion is on there, and as well as secondary school vendors. So the secondary school vendors have joined the user group because one of the focuses that we want to have is how can we exchange secondary school transcripts. Sometimes within provinces is where the priority is, and we're looking to do that across provincial borders as well. So we have those. We have some government agencies. Stats Canada is sitting at the table because they're interested in data standards that could be used across the country. And various government agencies are also supporting us. Illusion is very involved in our user group. We actually meet every 2 weeks for a 1-hour teleconference, and then we meet at the PESC data summits that are happening twice a year to just move forward the agenda and the work that we're doing. So what is the business case for what we're trying to do in terms of transferring transcripts across the country? The business case says the service is faster, more efficient for students across the country. Facilitates more timely transfers, articulation, and admission processes. So along with doing the transcript exchange, one of the things we will need to work out is how do we ensure that the data is understood properly by both the sending and the receiving institution. And so how can we be sure that the fields are properly identifying information and the Canadian needs are being met. So as we go through this process, if we discover within the standards that there are particular Canadian requirements for things that cannot be handled properly, the Canadian User Group will forward that to the PESC Change Control Board, and there's quite a rigorous procedure in terms of introducing those changes through PESC, where the membership has a limited time to review those. It would go to the records group to ensure that they're in agreement with the standards. And so it's quite tight, but it's also timely. I don't know if any of you were involved in the EDI transcripts that were done in the 90s, and it took a long, long time to get any changes through that process. This now is much more efficient and much more responsive, so we're very pleased about that. We want to improve the data quality, security, integrity, accuracy, comprehension. Those are all things that we see coming out of this transcript exchange. And also, we're all being discussing and being encouraged to understand student mobility and to enhance that opportunity for all of our students. Well, we see this data exchange as a strong step in support of that initiative across the country. And so if we can institute these transcript exchanges for students, it will allow that to be more efficient and helpful. We want transparency, traceability, accountability in the process. We want it to be very transparent, everybody to understand how it happens, and everybody to have their input into that. The process will improve efficiencies both for the sender and receivers of the data. So those of you that are doing electronic transcripts probably realize how beneficial that is and how smoothly that runs. And so we want to just increase that service and build on what's already there. We want reusable standards, consistent data processes within Canada. We want standardized data definitions across the country for consistency. So this is where some of the, initially when we worked within Ontario, we had to work through all of those standards for the transcripts. We're now starting to look across the country, and Bill will speak to a little bit about how we're doing some of that work. So we are starting to do that. We need to include identifiers on the transcript for better matching. So one of the issues we know that the universities have is when you receive a transcript, who the heck does this belong to and how do I hook it up to the right record? And so if we can facilitate that process, that will be very beneficial as well.
Environmentally friendly, less paper. Hopefully you take it into your document management systems and it's available, or into your SIS systems to be used as you need, right there with less paper being done. So we're looking to integrate it into SIS systems. As I showed, there are a number of vendors involved in this process. They are strong supporters of the PESC organization, and they have now become involved as a Canadian user group. And one of our goals is to work with vendors to create a voice and to create a common requirements to them, so they understand that these need to become part of their standard package and part of their releases. And if we can get that kind of standardization within the packages, then that will be beneficial for all of our institutions that use those particular vendors and packages. And they are quite open to discuss that and to see how to move it forward. And the message that we've got is, you need to tell us you need it, and we need to understand what it is you need, and then we can start to work at how can we deliver those things. We would be able to allow you to take the data into your systems and use it for GPA calculations, assessments, automatic adjudication, whatever processes that you need to do. It would have a better opportunity to analyze the data, and opportunity for institution-to-institution records transfer. So not only are we initially looking at transcripts, but there are other components of data that could potentially be transferred by these standards. And the other comment is, it is scalable internationally in the future. So we, as application centers, are in contact with worldwide application centers, and this is a big issue for them, international recruitment, which is also a big issue for us. And the obtaining of transcripts is something that is challenging for all involved. So we're looking for faster service for the students and applicants, less work for the admissions staff, accurate, consistent understanding of electronic transcripts. We want to eliminate fraudulent documents as much as possible, and extend the benefits of electronic transcripts to all of Canada, and do it regionally. Today's electronic transcript exchange is mostly regional, or it's on paper, and if we can improve that, that's a real bonus. So I'm going to pass it over to Bill, and he's going to take over.
What? I'm just going to bold it. Thanks, Trudy. I'm going to sort of try and move quickly, because I know I want to stay on time here. So why PESC XML Standards? XML provides it's become, XML in itself as a standard is becoming more accepted as a mechanism to structure data and to organize data. The XML standard is fairly mature. You'd be surprised on how much it's actually already used in Canada by vendors and by organizations across the country. We're actually surprised when we inventory sort of where the standards and really the EDI standard was sort of its original sort of follower. So it's one of the things we really just focused on is just picking, something that we can do. And one of the standards that's mature is the transcript standard. The challenges is actually surprisingly that how far it hasn't been used yet. In terms of it's still a big gap, surprising on how mature the standard is, but not in terms of it really expanding its use. Really in the end, I'm going to go through and sort of show you an example or our experience with using the standards and really how solid the business case is. Like it really is a no-brainer. I'm not gonna. I'll get into the example because I can explain it better here. But it's scalable in terms of in many ways in terms of easy to interpret or even consume the data because it's tagged data in terms of XML. it maps cross between the EDI world and other formats of the data. So there is crosswalks that have been developed between the various standards. So that's something that's been in development. And it's flexible in terms of even the transport mechanisms in the consumable, whether it be consumable in report holes or consumed in web services or secure FTP in terms of how it moves into and transported between partners. It's flexible, again, in terms of its format and being able to be consumed in different mechanisms. So whether that be your desktop tools like Excel, there's lots of tools available to view it and consume it, so you don't, even if you're not consuming it in processes or technologies, it's readable in terms of if you look at a transcript, you know exactly what the data is you're looking at in terms of its definitions and the tagging information. So, and that's been the experience. It's being used in government agency. I know in Ontario, it's become the standard as far as transferring statistical data and reporting data on enrollment, and that's going to be the case across the country. So some of the future opportunity, I mean, it's scalable to real-time processing. Where actually I'll talk about an example. We actually have done that in terms of used it in real time, and some of the benefits we learned when we stepped into the real-time world of exchanging a student record. In different sort of protocols for exchanging it. It allows for attachments of extensions, so XML in terms of attaching or embedding things like PDFs or other object types versus traditional EDI didn't allow for that, or flat file mechanisms in that. So embedding different types of objects into XML is possible. Better interaction with the student information systems, and more of the student information systems that we've encountered, they all are basically supporting an XML, web services, and in the sort of standard way of integrating. Some of our legacy processes using like flat file exchanges, and that they have lots of challenges. They're not flexible to change. If you need to add new data elements, things change. They're just not there. In terms of the vendors, generally in PESC, all the major vendors are involved in PESC. I mean, every time I've gone to a data summit, they're there. They're participating. They participate in the work groups. It's really a case of getting the use in the communities, in the institutions, in the organizations that are supporting the education. This is just really the bottom line is really consistency as it moves between whether it's in formats. So we don't see moving away from EDI. Some organizations have implemented EDI. Eventually they may change because of the technology. EDI hasn't proven to be used in other transaction types very much in the education sector. So for example, purchasing or any financial transactions, but XML is. So there's potentially business cases to move to XML period for multiple transaction types, not just transcripts. The importance, again, is maintaining the integrity of the process, the security, the usability, and the interpretability to use the data and consume it into process. And we've seen some of that in our experience with it, but so as other areas in Canada have actually taken it to that far where they're consuming the data and putting it into process, whether that be articulation processes, admissions processes, being able to move it immediately to make decisions with the data because you can rely on the consistency of the data that's been defined in these standards. This is just an example. This is an example. We have an electronic transcript management system at the Ontario College Application Services. I just wanted to talk of our experience with it, just quickly to show that we do this. We use all the protocols in the standards, so from the requisition to the tracking. So we found that it was really important to have a process that was SLA measured, was fully trackable, and and basically viewable by all stakeholders, the receiving party, the student, that they can see it. It was a transparent process, so we implemented it in that way. So we have an electronic XML request form. We send it to the provider. In this case, we've integrated our systems with web services with the high school some of the high school vendors. So for example, SRB is supporting the XML PESC, which is one of the major Ontario high school vendors in the high school community at the boards in Ontario. Similar with Maplewood, we've integrated this request process. So the process is set up is to ask for the transcript. So privacy and consent is tracked. So we're getting permission to request the transcript from a provider. We're using these are the standards that we're using in the process. In our process, these are the versions of the standards we use in the process. So we're just to prove that we use them. This is the process we support. We use an enterprise service bus architecture. So we support legacy standards like EDI, so we can translate between the message formats. With the Ontario colleges and the Ontario universities, the majority of the institutions are using EDI, so it was important to be able to be backwards compatible to standards and forward compatible. So we're using the mapping rules to how do you move from an EDI message to an XML message. So here's an example. This is with our experience with the boards and some of the things that changed. At Oakcrest, our traditional turnaround to get a transcript was almost 30 days to get a transcript from the traditional process in the paper. And at Oakcrest, we transcribe it on behalf of all the Ontario colleges. We actually transcribe the transcript. It was 30 days by the time the initial need for the transcript versus the process of receiving it. When we went to EQMS and we used a porthole version of it versus web services, we changed that to 5 business days in terms of the turnaround of getting the student record moved. When we went to fully automated version, which is using web services, we went to seconds to get the request and get the transcript into the process at the college. This is an example of one of the school boards, Hamilton Catholic District School Board. The other thing that we noticed in the data was that when we automated, 95% of the time, there was 95% of the time the request transaction went into the student record. We went to the web services of the board and we were able to receive the record within seconds. 95% of the time there was a match on the requisition to the record. Nobody touched it. We received it in seconds and displayed it to the applicant, said, this is the transcript that we received from your school, and it was real time. And really no performance issues, so it was in less than a second. Just in this process, we're probably one of the first to demonstrate real time in the process of doing this in real time, and that it was possible. And we have now got more boards that are coming online, including the Toronto District School Board that's considering moving this into real-time process because we're proving the business case. This was just one of the comments or feedbacks from one of the Catholic school board counselors in terms of the feedback we had there. In terms of always with stakeholders to have the experience, and really a lot of the process and the experience of applying these standards and changing that process was just positive. And this is at this point today at Oakcrest, we have 90% of the school by volume online now with the schools with the electronic transcript management service. And we're now in the process of connecting the universities to the service through UAC in terms of connecting to that same service. At this point, through the electronic transcript process, we move 142,000 transcripts a year right now through the process, and then integrated with the Ontario University Hub for university transcripts. So really what we're doing is carrying this forward is to move it and integrate the country with the same experience, and similar experiences exist in Alberta and BC of applying the same standards. So the dream, we have a charter. The charter is available. It's on our work group. We have a work group in Canadian PESC group of what we're trying to do. We're really focusing on not so much, we're looking at the schema and comparing the schema, how we've applied it and ensure consistency and creating basically a Canadian, one of the deliverables is a Canadian implementation guide. Here's how you do it and which standards that we reckon if there's any schemes. So we're going through more of the implementation process. Then we're not trying to develop new standards, but really here's how it should be done in Canada, and to really put the documentation together and the tool sets together to enable this to continue to scale out. We've communicated, as mentioned, partnerships with the Rook. We're here with CanHITE. We're in discussions with CMAC, which is the Council of Ministries of Education, and they participate in our group. Again, trying to get, and many of the provinces have already started. For example, New Brunswick has got support with the Deputy Minister of Education to implement the standards within the high school sector. So we're trying to get it. If you haven't did it in the province, if you're not using the standards at your institution, is to start implementing and make progress. So, and we're here really, the Canadian PESC Users Group is here to help. Some of us have experience, some are learning, but that's really what we're trying to facilitate is how do you do this and really help with the tools. And, we're all in different degrees. So we're focused. Right now, Oakcrest and Apply Alberta are working together to go through the schema for the high school transcript. UAC and BC are working together to go through the post-secondary transcript. So we're sort of teaming up and working on different parts of the problem. So we're in the requirements phase right now. We're doing a pilot, and really at this point, we're piloting with who's ready to go, and then potentially the Ontario, BC, Alberta, BC, potentially there's some other provinces but we're keeping it small and just making momentum. So we can get a connection between two provinces, in high school transcript connection between two provinces and post-secondary, and putting the process in. There's a lot of business rules and stuff that you have to deal with. Like, for example, the way we implemented it is we collect the transcript fee. Like, you still got to collect the fee if there's a transcript fee. What's the fee, and how do you settle payments? So that's one of the processes that we're dealing with. How do you do that? What should be a service level? We're trying to create standard service level and agreements to how to that can be used inter-partner and interconnection to interconnect these services. Funding's always an issue. Obviously, funding and getting some funding support helps to keep the momentum going. Many of our organizations are volunteering time. I mean, we're spending some of our evenings and weekends to just keep the work going, and it's amazing. I mean, we're meeting every 2 weeks at lunchtime. Give up for lunch. Because we're in Ontario, so the east and the west can sort of participate. So we meet across the country. We have the membership keeps growing. We now have a number of the K-12 vendors that are now participating. We have been working with Oracle, and really in the end, their agreement on the standard to get to the table. We have Elucian, which is one of the main SIS vendors at the table. So we're really working to find stakeholders and more with the vendors. It really comes down to is if there's community agreement to move in this direction, the vendors will put these integration pieces in their products. And we've started that. I mean, with, for example, SRB in Ontario is one of the primary vendors. They've put the integration pieces in their product. I mean, they're supporting PESC standards, working with us. They just need a reason to do. So I've talked a lot about this, but these are the deliverables. This is the scope, and I know I'm running out of time here. This is in the charter, but we're really, again, focused on the process, the documents. For example, the Rook National Transcript Guide, they're in the process of about trying to look at republishing it. It's still written in the context of a paper world, And one of the things we're going to help with the ROOK is help to concentrate it in how do you do with the record transfer in an electronic world. The implementation guide, the boundaries of paper versus the boundaries of electronic world are not the same. And so we really want to focus on how do you deal with a transcript exchange and what are the mandatory attributes of a transcript to exchange it. And quite frankly, we've gone through this process, and the National Transcript Guide is pretty close to the mandatory elements that are in the electronic world. But there's opportunity and value add that some other things that we may recommend to be changed based on just recognizing that that difference between the electronic world and the paper world are not the same boundaries that we have today. So really, to bring this, really part of what we're here to do again is awareness and education, helping you understand the benefits. If your organization is ready, or you're looking at ways of getting electronic process to integrate in, whether it's articulation process or whether it's an admissions process, like talk to us. We have cards here. If you want information, if you want to get in contact to participate, become a member of our work group. We have all our documentation and all our information in a workspace that we share. So it's purely it's a collaborative movement. We're working together. Us and UAC have worked together for years, and we continue to collaborate on finding ways to sort of improve, things for students, for our institution, for our member institutions. So you can join the PESC users group, Canadian PESC users group. You can become a member of PESC. You can become a member through your associations like Apply Alberta, or you can become a direct member. For an example, University of Lethbridge has been a member for years. Anyway, I open it up for questions.
So there are no questions on the live Q&A. Hopefully there are questions in the room. Go ahead.
Is the user group made up of IT folks as well as folks from the business? I'm thinking it would be.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So a lot of, for example, Lucian has a Canadian Solutions Center. So some of you may know Dave Matthews, but he's a member. He's a technical resource on the vendor side. Similar from our organizations, there's both technical records, institutional records keeping representatives. So for example, we have a representative from our colleges, from Conestoga College, that participates as a records expert in the institutions.
I'd like to add something to that as well, that you may be wondering why we chose to present here at CanHike. And it's because many of you may get the call from your registrars to say, hey, we're interested in the Canadian Transcript Network. Can you help us? And we just want to get the message out there so you may get asked to participate.
Or we may drive it.
Yes?
And of course, that has been the experience when we worked on EQMS in Ontario. Sometimes it came from the IT group, sometimes it came from the records group. It varied. Sometimes it was the counselor, the high school counselor that was the sort of champion within the institution. So the champion can be anybody, and that's been our experience. To sort of to really educate and help promote it within their institution or organization.
We're also working with the various cross-country registrars associations. So we're from Ontario has a member, and then the Western provinces and the Eastern provinces are discussing this at their various registrars and registrar association groups.
There's a question back here.
In terms of the business case, I didn't see it, maybe it hasn't been on, maybe just didn't show it, in connection with actually the benefit in a more quantitative sense or resource sense. Obviously, it's usually beneficial in terms of resource reduction to get any single transcript. I wonder if there's any investigation in that would help, particularly in the current climate of funding, to help institutions maybe go for this because of that, if for no other reason.
Yeah, the business case was strong financially on both the institution on our side and with the student. I didn't put that up. We do have that. There's also white papers done on this that are available through PESC in terms of the business case and the metrics around but I'd be happy to share any of our experience, because I put some of those measurements, the student measurements of shift, but there's the financial benefits were there too. I mean, there was big dollar savings on Oakcrest in terms of the dollars it cost.
Do we have other questions?
Yes,
So we're-
do you have any timeline that you put together in terms of?
Well, we're moving, without funding it, and we're moving as fast as we can on the resources, so we are looking to initiate, I know with UAC and DC, they're in the fall, they're starting up discussions to demonstrate to go into pilot discussions. We've been working with Alberta. I'm going through the high school schema, and really, we hope that is something we can start to connect into the fall of this year. So in terms of demonstrating that, our momentum is basically, we've committed that we're meeting every 2 weeks. We're meeting for an hour every 2 weeks to keep work. We assign work, people do homework, we bring that work back. So that's how we're working. But again, it's at this point, we are looking at funding, and funding varies from province. So for example, some of the provinces may get funding because it's provincial to help with the momentum. Some may get it more local. So we are looking at, we did create a directory of funding opportunities to sort of help with provide some funding support depending on the province and where you are. But that just helps buy resources to work.
So it is a strategic priority for the University's Application Center because we see it as a big benefit to our 20 universities that we service. So we have a number of projects, small steps that are all working towards supporting this national transcript hub. And so we will be sharing that just as OCAS has shared the work that they will be doing. And we kind of think that as some people get going on it and an exchange starts happening, then it's going to be up to the individual provinces or institutions to say, hey, I want to get on board with that. We're not going to be going out pulling people in. We're just going to try and show you what the benefits are, and then hopefully, if we've got an implementation guide and data sharing agreements, privacy issues covered, financial issues covered, these are all the things you need to be thinking about, and these are some of the resolutions that have happened. That as institutions start to look at it, the framework will be there to support and encourage that. And plus, if you're using PESC standards, then you can very quickly join into the networks that are already doing that and have that available.
We have time for one more question over here.
So what model are you approaching with the exchange? Is it a pure transcript exchange, or are you relying on some sort of clearinghouse to negotiate?
So that's an excellent question. At this point, we don't think that it's going to be this single entity thing. So it's really a connection to providers. So for example, in Ontario, we're connected to the Ontario colleges. We connect to UAC for post-secondary. So it's connections to services. Some of those may be vendor services. So there's a number of vendors that are in this service model that are moving into Ontario. But we don't think we can dictate. One of the problems in that is I'm not sure we can dictate any jurisdiction or province to say, this is, you need to use this provider or whatever. We think that's a procurement decision. What we're trying to encourage is this is what you should be asking for, and here's the standards that are being accepted in Canada, and how it should be implemented. So we're not really thinking we're going out here and procuring a single Canadian provider solution. If I understand.
Another way to answer that might be that by default, and Bill's presented this, that in Ontario, BC, and Alberta, there are application organizations that kind of naturally lend themselves towards being a hub. But in other provinces, that part still needs to be figured out, whether it's a vendor or some other organization that steps to the fore.
And speaking to your time frame, New Brunswick is very active in terms of getting that internally within their province. And so that's their first priority, but they're keeping this in mind as they go forward. So they're developing it hopefully with the way that we can then tap into that once they've got it set up.
Okay, and if people have other questions, you can probably catch Bill or Trudy outside afterwards. Thank you all very much.